What's the actual evidence for the resurrection? The facts skeptical historians grant, and what explains them? Last time we looked at whether Jesus existed. The historical answer was clear. He lived, he taught, and he was executed under Pontius Pilate. Today's question is harder. What happened after that? I'm not going to ask you to just take the gospel's word for it. Instead, I want to start with a handful of facts that even skeptical, non-Christian historians generally accept. Then we'll ask a simple question. What actually explains them? So let's work through this. Again, I'm Jonathan Roberts. I appreciate you being here today. If you get any value from this, please subscribe. So here's the approach. Rather than assuming the Bible is reliable and arguing from there, we're going to work from the other direction. We'll look at what historians access the spectrum, including agnostics, atheists, and generally agree happen. Kind of go over what they do. So then we'll put a natural explanation on the table, one at a time, and see how well each one accounts for the evidence. And I'll be upfront right now. This argument doesn't end in a mathematical proof. It ends in a judgment call about which explanation fits best. And I'll show you my reasoning, and you can weigh in yourself. Here are the core facts most historians of this period accept, whatever their personal belief is. 1, Jesus was crucified by Roman authorities and died. Crucifixion was brutally effective, and Roman soldiers were experienced at it. 2, shortly after, his followers sincerely believed they had seen him alive again. Not that they claimed it for gain, but they had actually believed it. 3, these experiences transformed them. A group that had scattered in fear became a movement that publicly proclaimed the resurrection in the same city where Jesus had been executed. And then 4, Paul, who had actively persecuted Christians, converted after what he described as an encounter with the risen Jesus. He went from hunting the movement to leading it at an enormous personal cost. And then 5, James, Jesus' brother, appears to be skeptical during Jesus' ministry and later became a leader of the church in Jerusalem. And by the way, seek the translation to brother. It's not the same as it is today. But notice what's not on the list. I haven't asked you to accept the resurrection happened. These are data points. The question is, what explains them? One objection you'll hear is that the resurrection story develops slowly, as a legend growing over generations. The timeline makes that hard to sustain. In 1 Corinthians, Paul passes along a summary of the resurrection claim, naming specific witnesses, and he explicitly says he received it from others before him. Scholars across the spectrum, including skeptical ones, date this creed extremely early. Many place it within just a few years of the crucifixion, some within months. That matters. Legends generally need time and distance from the room of people who were actually there to die off. This claim was circulating while the original witnesses are still alive, still locatable, and still able to contradict it. Whatever else you conclude, the resurrection claim is not a late addition. It's there from the beginning. So let's put the alternatives on the table, honestly. First, they made it up. The problem is what happened next. These men spent their entire lives proclaiming the message under a real threat. And by every early account, many died for it. People do not die for false beliefs. People rarely die for something they personally know was invented with nothing to gain. And then second, Jesus didn't actually die. He survived the cross and revived in the tomb. This asks you to believe that a man who had been scourged and crucified escaped a sealed tomb and then convinced his followers he was gloriously alive and had conquered death rather than just desperately needed a doctor. Don't know. And then third, hallucinations. This one deserves serious treatment because grief can produce vivid experiences, but hallucinations are typically individual and not group events. And the accounts described appearances to multiple people in different places at different times, including to Paul and James, who weren't grieving followers hoping to see him. Paul was a hostile opponent. Remember that. And then fourth, the body was moved or stolen. Possible in principle, but this would need to be pulled off in the same city where authorities had every reason to produce the body and end the movement immediately. And it doesn't explain the appearance at all. An empty tomb by itself doesn't make anyone believe someone is risen. It makes them believe there's been a theft. Each of these can explain a piece. What's hard is finding one that explains the whole set. Now, I want to give you the strongest version of the other side, because I think you deserve that. A thoughtful skeptic will say something like this: resurrection is an extraordinary claim, so it requires extraordinary evidence. Even if every natural explanation is unlikely, an unlikely natural explanation may still be more probable than a miracle. Maybe some combination of factors we can't fully reconstruct 2,000 years later accounted for all of this. That's a serious argument, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Here's where I think it turns. The reasoning only holds up if you've already concluded that miracles are impossible in principle. If God exists, and that's what the last several videos in this session have been building toward, then the resurrection isn't a violation of anything. It's an act by the one who set up the system in the first place. So the question isn't about evidence or only about evidence. It's about what you're willing to count as possible before you look at the evidence. So where does this land? We have a group of facts most historians accept. We have a claim that shows up impossibly early, while witnesses were still alive. And we have a set of natural explanations, each of which handles part of the evidence but strains badly against the rest. The resurrection explains all of it at once. Why the tomb was empty, why hostile skeptics like Paul and James changed sides, why frightened men became willing to die, why the claim appears immediately rather than developing over generations. That's not mathematical proof, and I'm not going to call it that. It's the same kind of reasoning we use in history and in courtrooms, which an explanation of accounts for the most evidence with the least strain. On that standard, I think the resurrection is the strongest answer available. You have to weigh it yourself, and that's generally how it should work. If this gave you a clearer way to think through the strongest claim in Christianity, hit like and subscribe if you're new here. And if you're on the fence after this one, that's fine. I'd rather you actually wrestle with it than just take my word for it. And next time, though, we're staying on the historical questions, and we're going to start looking at the Gospels themselves. When were they written? Who wrote them? And how much can actually be reconstructed about, how reliable they've been transmitted to us? So again, Jonathan Roberts, and I appreciate you watching.